You publicly claim to have the Epstein client list waiting for your review and then produce nothing relevant to that claim.
Senator Durbin, if you listen to my entire clip on that, I said I had not reviewed it yet, that it was sitting on my desk along with the JFK files, the Martin Luther King files, and I said I had not yet reviewed it. And if you see our memo on Epstein, you will see, excuse me, our memo on Epstein clearly points out that there was no client list, our July 6th memo.
Who gave the order to flag records related to President Trump?
To flag records for President Trump?
To flag any records which included his name.
I'm not going to discuss anything about that with you.
There's been public reporting that Jeffrey Epstein showed people photos of President Trump with half-naked young women. Do you know if the FBI found those photographs in their search of Jeffrey Epstein's safe or premises or otherwise? Have you seen any such thing?
Okay, so Attorney General Pam Bondi is having a really bad week, and honestly, she brought it on herself. A former immigration judge just filed a major lawsuit against her, and the Department of Justice alleging wrongful termination, discrimination based on sex, nationality, and political affiliation. And instead of handling this like a professional, instead of letting the lawyers deal with it quietly while the legal process plays out, Bondi decided to go on a public rant at a cabinet meeting, trying to downplay the whole thing. She stood there bragging about how the administration has been sued 575 times and talking about their 24 Supreme Court wins like that somehow makes this lawsuit not matter. She was practically pounding the table about their 92% success rate. But here's the thing. None of that changes the fact that a federal judge just got fired and is now alleging that it was discriminatory and politically motivated. None of that changes the fact that this lawsuit opens up a whole new front in the legal wars over Trump's mass firings. And none of that changes the fact that reports indicate judges are threatening consequences, including contempt or sanctions, if these firings keep proceeding without proper due process. But before we go any further, real quick, let's be honest, you can't really trust mainstream media anymore. That's why we built Pump Politics, to bring you real stories, real context, and no corporate spin. If you want to stay ahead of the headlines, join our free newsletter. We'll send the news straight to your inbox every day. Just click the link in the description to join. And if you just want to support what we're doing, join us. Be part of the community that actually cares about the truth. All right, let's get back to the video.
If I could just get your reaction to the James Comey, Letitia James cases being dropped today. Back in Washington, James Comey put out a video. He said this matters most because a message has to be sent. The President of the United States cannot use the Department of Justice to target his political enemies. Your reaction to the cases being dropped into that specific message?
Sure, we'll be taking all available legal action, including an immediate appeal, to hold Letitia James and James Comey accountable for their unlawful conduct.
What is your reaction to his statement?
I'm going to keep going on this. I'm not worried about someone who has been charged with a very serious crime. His alleged actions were a betrayal of public trust.
This is about former Ohio immigration judge Tanya Namer, who filed her lawsuit on December 1st. She's not just some random federal employee who got caught up in the mass layoffs. She's a judge, an immigration judge who was hearing cases and making decisions that affect people's lives. And she's saying she was fired not because of her job performance, not because of any legitimate efficiency concerns, but because of who she is and what the administration perceived her political views to be. This is the first major legal challenge to the mass firing of over 100 immigration judges that the administration has carried out this year. Over 100 judges gone. Think about what that means for the immigration court system that was already massively backlogged. Think about what that means for the cases that were pending before those judges. Think about what that means for the people waiting months or years for their immigration hearings, who now have to start over with new judges or just wait even longer in an overwhelmed system. And Bondi's response to all of this is to brag about win rates at the Supreme Court? Come on, that tells you everything you need to know about how this administration views legal accountability. They see lawsuits as annoyances to be dismissed rather than legitimate challenges that deserve serious engagement. They see courts as obstacles to be overcome rather than co-equal branches of government that have a role in checking executive power. And when judges threaten actual consequences for proceeding without due process, the administration's response is defensive public relations rather than changing their behavior to comply with the law. that arrogance is going to catch up with them eventually. It may already be catching up with them given the cascade of legal losses and the growing Republican pushback we've been seeing on the federal layoff chaos. The threats of contempt or sanctions that reports indicate are looming here are particularly significant because they represent judges losing patience with an administration that seems to view court orders as optional. We've seen Judge Ilston demanding immediate compliance with her injunctions on State Department layoffs. We've seen courts blocking various aspects of the workforce reduction efforts. And now we're seeing signals that if the administration keeps trying to proceed without proper process, there will be consequences that go beyond just having to reinstate workers. Contempt findings, sanctions against attorneys, personal accountability for officials who defy court orders. That's the kind of escalation that happens when an administration repeatedly pushes the boundaries and treats judicial oversight as an inconvenience rather than a constitutional requirement. So we're going to dig into what this lawsuit actually alleges, why Bondi's defensive reaction is so revealing, and what the threats of judicial consequences mean for the broader battle over Trump's workforce overhaul. Because this one touches on immigration, the courts, discrimination law, and executive power all at once. Stick around. All right, so let's really get into what's happening here, because this lawsuit and Bondi's reaction to it reveal a lot about how the administration is approaching legal challenges and why they might be in more trouble than their public bravado suggests. So Judge Tanya Niemer was an immigration judge in Ohio. Immigration judges are interesting because they're technically employees of the Department of Justice rather than independent Article III judges with lifetime appointments. They work within the Executive Office for Immigration Review, which is part of DOJ. That means they can be hired and fired by the Attorney General in ways that regular federal judges can't be. But that doesn't mean they can be fired for any reason. There are still civil service protections, there are still anti-discrimination laws, there are still due process requirements. And Judge Niemer is alleging that her firing violated all of those. The lawsuit filed on December 1st accuses Attorney General Bondi of wrongful termination based on discrimination. Specifically, Niemer is claiming she was fired because of her sex, her nationality, and her perceived political affiliation. Those are all protected categories under federal employment law. You can't fire someone because they're a woman. You can't fire someone because of their national origin. And you can't fire federal employees because of their political views, and that's what civil service protections are specifically designed to prevent. Niemer's lawsuit is essentially saying that the administration didn't fire her because of anything related to her job performance or any legitimate efficiency concern. They fired her because of who she is and because they assumed, based on her background, that she wasn't loyal to Trump's agenda. This is the first major legal challenge to the mass removal of immigration judges, and that makes it particularly significant. The administration has fired over 100 immigration judges this year as part of its effort to reshape the immigration court system. They've described this as getting rid of judges who were too lenient, or who weren't moving cases fast enough, or who weren't aligned with the administration's immigration enforcement priorities. But when you fire over 100 judges and one of them sues alleging discrimination, you've got a problem, because discovery in that lawsuit is going to reveal how decisions were made about who to fire and why. If the evidence shows that political loyalty or demographic characteristics were factors in those decisions, that opens up the possibility of similar lawsuits from other fired judges and potentially a class action that encompasses the entire group. Now let's talk about Bondi's reaction, because it's really quite something. The day after the lawsuit was filed, there was a cabinet meeting, and Bondi used part of her time to go on what can only be described as a defensive rant about all the lawsuits the administration is facing. She said the administration has been sued 575 times. She bragged about having 24 Supreme Court wins. She claimed a 92% success rate and acted like this proved the administration was doing everything right and the lawsuits were all frivolous attacks. But think about what she's actually saying here. Being sued 575 times in less than a year is not something to brag about. That's extraordinary, even by the standards of controversial administrations. That suggests that an enormous number of people and organizations believe the administration has violated their rights or broken the law. And a 92% success rate sounds impressive until you realize that means they've lost 8% of those cases, dozens of losses where courts found they did something wrong. More importantly, Bondi's focus on Supreme Court wins is misleading about the actual state of the legal battles. Yes, the administration has won some significant cases at the Supreme Court, including the big ruling in July that lifted injunctions and allowed mass layoffs to proceed. But that doesn't mean they're winning everywhere. Lower courts are still blocking specific actions. Lawsuits alleging discrimination are just getting started. The DEI class action was filed just 2 days after Niemer's lawsuit. The legal exposure is enormous and growing, and no amount of bragging about Supreme Court statistics changes that reality. Bondi's defensive performance at the cabinet meeting suggests she knows the administration is more vulnerable than they want to admit publicly. And then there are the reported threats of consequences from judges if the administration keeps proceeding without proper due process. This is where things get really serious. Judges have a lot of tools available to them when they believe parties are not complying with orders or are acting in bad faith. They can hold officials in contempt of court. They can impose sanctions on government attorneys. They can issue increasingly stringent injunctions with penalties for violation. They can refer matters for investigation. When reports indicate that judges are threatening these kinds of consequences, that's a signal that the judiciary's patience is running out with an administration that seems to view court oversight as optional. We've seen this dynamic building throughout the federal layoff saga. Judge Ilston calling the administration's approach fire then aim, her demands for immediate compliance with injunctions, her findings that firings were politically motivated, Trump attacking her on social media and calling for her impeachment. The administration's lawyers admitting they lack legal justification for some of their actions. Each escalation begets another escalation. The administration pushes boundaries, courts push back. The administration attacks the courts get more aggressive in their oversight. It's a cycle that's producing increasingly sharp confrontations between the executive and judicial branches. This lawsuit also connects directly to the broader pattern of legal challenges we've been tracking. The DEI class action filed on December 3rd targets workers across more than 20 agencies, including the Department of Justice itself. Bondi's own memos from back in February ordering the end of what she called illegal DEI in DOJ are now being cited in lawsuits as evidence of discriminatory intent. The State Department layoffs blocked by Judge Ilston, the chaos of the shutdown firings that's causing even Republicans to break ranks, the Trump attacks on judges. All of these threads are interweaving into a comprehensive legal challenge to the administration's workforce reduction approach. And Nimmer's lawsuit adds immigration judges to the mix, expanding the scope of who's fighting back and what kinds of claims are being made. The immigration court angle is particularly concerning for the administration because immigration is supposed to be one of their signature issues. They came into the second term promising to crack down on illegal immigration and speed up the deportation process. But if their approach to reshaping the immigration courts is found to be discriminatory or in violation of civil service laws, that undermines the legitimacy of the entire project. It's hard to claim you're making the immigration system work better when judges are suing you for illegal termination and courts are threatening you with contempt for not following proper procedures. So let's break this down into what you really need to understand about this lawsuit, Bondi's reaction, and what it all means for the ongoing legal wars over Trump's workforce overhaul. Because this case touches on so many different issues: immigration policy, judicial independence, discrimination law, executive power, civil service protections, and understanding how they all connect helps explain why the administration is in deeper trouble than they want to admit. First point, this lawsuit represents the opening of a new front in the legal battle over mass firings, one that specifically targets the treatment of immigration judges. Previous challenges have focused on layoffs at regular federal agencies, on RIF procedures during the shutdown, on DEI workers across the government. This one is about judges, people who were exercising quasi-judicial authority and making decisions that affect fundamental rights. Immigration judges occupy a unique position in the system. They're not Article 3 judges with constitutional protections, but they're supposed to have enough independence to make fair decisions on asylum claims, deportation orders, and other matters where people's lives and liberty are at stake. When you fire over 100 of them and one sues alleging discrimination, you're raising questions about whether the administration is trying to pack the immigration courts with loyalists who will rubber stamp their enforcement priorities. That's a serious allegation with constitutional dimensions because it goes to whether people appearing before immigration courts can expect fair hearings from impartial decision makers. If the answer is no, if judges are being selected and removed based on political loyalty rather than qualifications and fairness, then the entire immigration adjudication system is compromised. The discrimination claims in this lawsuit are particularly potent because they're the kind of allegations that can survive even when the administration has broad authority over personnel decisions. Yes, the Attorney General has significant power over immigration judges as DOJ employees, but that power doesn't extend to discriminating based on sex, national origin, or political affiliation. If Nimmer can show that her firing was motivated by any of those factors, she wins regardless of how much authority Bondi otherwise has. And in discovery, her lawyers are going to be looking for evidence of how firing decisions were made across all 100-plus immigration judge removals. If they find patterns, if they find that judges with certain demographics or perceived political views were disproportionately targeted, that evidence becomes powerful not just for Niemer's case, but potentially for a broader challenge to the entire immigration judge purge. Second point, Bondi's defensive public reaction reveals an administration that's rattled by the accumulating legal challenges, even as they try to project confidence. That cabinet meeting performance was not the behavior of someone who's comfortable with their legal position. Bragging about being sued 575 times is a weird flex. Emphasizing Supreme Court wins while ignoring lower court losses and pending cases is cherry-picking. The whole presentation had the feel of someone trying to reassure themselves and their boss that everything is fine when they know it's not. Confident litigants don't need to hold press conferences about their win rates. They let their courtroom victories speak for themselves. The fact that Bondi felt the need to go on a defensive rant the day after a major lawsuit was filed suggests the administration knows this one is different, that it poses real risks, that it could open the door to much broader liability. The disconnect between Bondi's public confidence and the reports of judges threatening consequences is also telling. If everything were going as well as Bondi claims, judges wouldn't be talking about contempt and sanctions. Courts threaten those kinds of consequences when they believe parties are not taking their orders seriously, when they see a pattern of non-compliance or bad faith, when they need to escalate to get attention. The fact that we're seeing those threats in multiple contexts, the State Department layoffs, the immigration judge firings, the DEI cases, suggests a judiciary that's increasingly frustrated with an administration that treats court orders as obstacles to be evaded rather than mandates to be obeyed. That frustration is going to translate into increasingly aggressive rulings and increasingly serious consequences for non-compliance. Third point, the threat of contempt or sanctions represents a significant escalation that could have real consequences for administration officials personally, not just for the government as an institution. When a court holds someone in contempt or imposes sanctions, those are directed at individuals. A contempt finding against a government lawyer or a DOJ official is a serious professional consequence. It goes on their record. It can affect their careers. It can result in fines or even jail time in extreme cases. The prospect of personal accountability changes the calculus for people inside the administration who might otherwise be willing to push boundaries because they figure the government will defend them if things go wrong. We've already seen signs that some career officials are uncomfortable with what's being demanded of them. Agencies pushed back on OMB's aggressive layoff targets. The VA backed down from planned cuts. Career lawyers at DOJ have to be watching these lawsuits and these judicial threats and wondering whether they want to be the ones defending actions that courts keep finding to be legally deficient. If the threat of personal consequences becomes real, if courts actually start sanctioning attorneys or holding officials in contempt, that's going to make it much harder for the administration to find people willing to execute their more aggressive workforce reduction plans. You can order your subordinates to do something, but if they're worried about being personally sanctioned by a court, they're going to be a lot more cautious about how they proceed. Fourth point, this lawsuit and Bondi's reaction to it need to be understood as part of the larger pattern of chaos and legal exposure that's been building throughout Trump's second term. The administration came in with aggressive goals for reshaping the federal workforce. They wanted to move fast. They wanted dramatic results. They wanted to be able to claim they were draining the swamp and making government more efficient. But in their haste, they've created legal liability at every turn. The procedural violations during the shutdown, the political targeting of DEI programs, the attacks on judges who rule against them, the wrongful terminations that even their own allies are now criticizing. And now the discriminatory firing of immigration judges. Each of these creates its own set of lawsuits and legal problems, and together they form a comprehensive indictment of an approach that prioritized political messaging over legal compliance. Bondi can brag about Supreme Court wins all she wants, but that doesn't make these problems go away. The Supreme Court ruling in July lifted some injunctions and allowed some layoffs to proceed, but it didn't immunize the administration from discrimination claims. It didn't authorize firing people for political reasons. It didn't eliminate civil service protections. The administration still has to comply with the law even after winning at the Supreme Court, and courts are still going to hold them accountable when they don't. The Niemer lawsuit, the DEI class action, the ongoing challenges to shut down layoffs, these cases are all going to proceed regardless of what happened at the Supreme Court, and each one carries the potential for findings that embarrass the administration and constrain their ability to continue on their current path. So where does this leave us? We've got an attorney general publicly freaking out at cabinet meetings while trying to pretend everything is fine. We've got judges threatening contempt and sanctions for an administration that keeps pushing boundaries without proper process. We've got the first major lawsuit challenging the mass firing of immigration judges. We've got the DEI class action expanding the scope of discrimination allegations. We've got Republicans in Congress demanding answers about the chaos. We've got Trump attacking judges on social media. And we've got a legal landscape that gets more treacherous for the administration with every passing week. Something has to give. Either the administration dramatically changes its approach to workforce reduction, slowing down and ensuring legal compliance before proceeding with terminations, or they keep barreling ahead and face escalating judicial consequences that could include contempt findings, sanctions, and increasingly hostile rulings. Or they find some political escape hatch through legislation or Supreme Court intervention that insulates them from accountability. Right now, all of those possibilities remain in play, and we won't know which direction things go until more cases are decided and more political battles are fought. But one thing is clear, the legal walls are closing in from multiple directions, and bragging about win rates isn't going to make those walls go away. Keep watching because this story is evolving daily, and the stakes for everyone involved, the fired workers, the judges, the administration, and the country, keep getting higher. Stay tuned.